Good evening to the counselors of India who have joined us. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules and doing yet another Zoom call. I was reading up earlier about how our brain processes so much screen time differently, because I was complaining to my wife off late about how tired I've been feeling after a day long of Zoom calls. So I apologize for doing another one of these webinars, but I know the wonderful response that we got from the webinar last week. And in response to that, we have a fantastic panel here today of extraordinary admission officers who can perhaps shed some light for us on how things are going to look as we go forward. So much of what we are going to go through is going to be dictated by this virus. It's definitely hard to predict the future, and I think all of us are moving day by day and week by week at this moment, but the onus of what college is going to be like and what the fall term is going to be like falls on colleges, and as their representatives, our panel are going to answer some questions today. So thank you everybody for taking time out and being with us. I wish all of you a very good morning. And especially UCLA, Travis, this must be a little bit earlier than the others for you. So before,
coffee.
I've got my evening cup of tea as well over here. So before I go ahead, I just wanted to take a moment out and talk about a couple of housekeeping issues. Number one is that the session is going to hopefully last somewhere between 40 to 50 minutes, followed by 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. And then the second point is that we are going to be recording today's session. I can see that it's recording. Thank you for that, Devesh. And we will be sharing this with everybody who is participating with us today, and along with all the other counselors that we are in touch with across India. So having said that, let me introduce you to the panel. Joining us from New York University today is Alex Polk. Hi, Alex. So good to see you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Great to be here.
Joining us from upstate New York, Syracuse University is Brendan Bond. Mr. Bond, nice to see you.
Good afternoon. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
The El Jefe is also in the house. We have the Vice President of Enrollment Management at Cornell University. John Burdick is with us. Hi, how are you, John?
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. I missed the chance to come for the Next Genius competition in January because I changed universities. So it's nice to be in connection with India again.
Yeah, you were dearly missed. From Union College in upstate New York as well, we have Nicole Buensley, although I don't think that's where she is right now. How are you, Nicole?
Sure I am. Look, it looks like I'm at Union, right? You see the knot in the background. Hi, everybody.
From down under in New Orleans, we have Paul Burgess from Tulane University with a gorgeous view behind him.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, sunrise over New Orleans.
And from Manhattan, Barnard College of Columbia University, we have Ruby Bhattacharya. How are you, Ruby?
Hey everyone, good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And last but not the least, we have Travis Fuller, who is the Assistant Director of Undergraduate Admissions at UCLA and a fellow Bruin. Go Bruins.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
So thank you, everybody. I sort of wanted to structure the webinar in an interesting way today. I thought what we would do is we would poll our audience of admission of school counselors and respond to how they poll. All right. So here comes the first polling question. I'm going to allow the panelists to vote as well and have a look at it. The question is and this is the question for the audience, who is primarily school counselors, is for your graduating batch, what worries you the most about what's coming next or what's happening right now? Here comes the poll. I'm going to give you about a minute or so to answer. So thank you very much. Okay, about 20 seconds more. Okay, so closing the poll now. Thank you so much, everybody, for answering. So if I could share the results, can my panel see the results? Yes, great, thank you. So the question was, what are counselors worried about the most when it comes to their graduating batch? And you can see the nature of the fall semester seems to be right in the lead, and obviously we are all aware of this. So I think we should kickstart today's discussion by talking about what the fall term, the fall semester is going to look like. So I would appreciate, if Travis could comment first. So what's the fall term at UCLA going to look like? And how is UCLA approaching this?
Yeah, that really is the million dollar question for everyone right now. And I wish I had a more concrete answer for folks listening, other than we're still in the process of figure things out, just like everyone else. Whatever we do, it will concord with the best interests of our students. With some degree of certainty, however, I can say the following three things. First, we do hope to resume classes as normal in the fall at UCLA. We're optimists here. We're going to remain optimistic, but we know this may not be possible. So we are exploring contingency options just in case. Luckily, we're on the quarter system here. So our start date is a little bit later in the fall, towards the end of September. So we have some additional time to kind of examine the extant evidence and really kind of make the most judicious decision in terms of assessing the viability of a fall quarter. The other update, or the other two updates, is second, orientation will operate remotely this summer. So our students will still have access to academic counselors, video tours of campus, and they'll still be able to register for their fall coursework. It'll just be via a digital medium similar to this. And then lastly, we're still in the process of strategizing ways to safely house our incoming students. So there may be adjustments in our housing policies based on CDC guidelines and the new practices of social distancing. So school counselors who are watching, please feel free to reach out to us at any point in time. We have a great international team here, and we're really working to mitigate the stress of our students as much as we can.
Thank you, Travis. John, what is Cornell's view on this?
Well, I think Travis said it all well. I would just suggest that there's a time frame ahead for counselors to look at. It's not going to be this week while students are still, in many cases, deciding where they'd most prefer to go and sending their commitments. I know many are actively on that decision right now. At Cornell, we are exploring really a whole variety of options, all the way from full in-person instruction starting more or less at the same time to full online instruction, which would be the case if the pandemic is still widespread and still as dangerous as it has been across the country, when we would join basically, we think, the entire world in that kind of an approach. Maybe most promising to me is some hybrid approaches where the most dangerous practices, like very large classes or faculty who are more compromised than others, trying to find a right balance for that. And then, as Travis said, social distancing in housing and across the campus is very likely. What I hope won't be true is that there'll be a patchwork of individual decisions. The colleges and universities, I think, are all more or less on the same kind of time frame as Cornell is. So we're going to be ready by May 15th, while our faculty are still able to think very carefully about both their online and their in-person options for the fall. And then, but still probably defer the actual final decision about what we're going to do till sometime more like the middle of June. And one of the things I'll mention that I think is particularly relevant for India is that we're hoping that past the middle of June is also a time when there will be new and better answers about open consulates and visa opportunities, because that's very much on our mind as a special burden for international students at the moment, of not having the security they'd want about that set of decisions as well.
Yeah, so if I'm a high school, graduate at the moment, and I'm coming to Cornell. I'm wondering, am I going to go to Cornell? Am I not going to go to Cornell? So things will clear up by June, is what you're saying. And
yeah, well, I'll say if you're an admitted student, you're going to Cornell. The challenge of creating a community in an all virtual environment is tremendous. But I also think that we've been living through that challenge since the middle of March with our prospective students. We've seen a pretty robust response to online opportunities for admitted students to engage with the community. We'll do what we can to try and build that for the fall too, and then get people to campus as soon as it's safe, but not sooner.
okay, thank you. Nicole, what's it looking like at Union? Any different?
I think there's a lot of similarities. Cornell's on the quarter system. We're on a trimester system. So the only, I think, additional is we have ability to start a month later and float into December is probably the only other unique option because of the trimester. We're also a smaller campus. So in some ways, class size is typically smaller already in terms of distancing and enough space to spread out classes. There are a lot of options, I think, for all of us to be able to sort of flex our schedules a little bit more, even if they're on campus, to make maybe for a different sort of schedule for students to have more space in classes. And the only other thing I think is, just again, I think mentioned the ability for our seniors to maybe move off campus with a lot of housing right around our campus that's available. Students may have the access. We may bring some of that on the grid for students as well. But I think that it's similar, that we're just waiting to see how things unfold but prepared in every way for sort of every possible scenario. I think that's what all of our campuses are doing, is looking through every possible scenario and making sure that students are a part of our campuses the second they're supposed to be. Just what version of that is in question.
Yeah, thank you. Alex, NYU is probably the most international in terms of having 3 campuses and the percentage of students coming in that are international students. Are the challenges you're facing any different from what we've heard, and what is NYU thinking, NYU in Manhattan thinking about opening campuses in fall?
Yeah, so not particularly different. I have to say that, my fellow panelists have really summarized everything. I think that we're all in very much a similar situation. I will say that we, for better or worse, did have the advantage of having to start this process a little bit earlier. Of course, one of our degree granting campuses is in Shanghai. And so because of the early outbreak in China, we had to make before the spring semester started, we had to make some really quick decisions about how we were going to handle our Shanghai campus. At that time, I think the world had its fingers crossed that it would be a little bit more localized. And of course, it is now a global pandemic. So we did learn a lot of quick lessons back in January. And so because of that, we, as everyone else has said, we are very confident and we're 100% sure that we will be open, we will continue to be open as a university, but just what exactly does that mean? As everyone knows, New York City has received a lot of media attention, and it has been really the epicenter so far of the pandemic in the United States. So we're not sure. We're still looking at recommendations day by day. We unfortunately, it looks like cases have slowed down a little bit, so maybe that is good news for New York, and it means that other areas will be hit harder later. We're just not sure. What we will say, though, is that we have committed to not making a blanket decision for the entire university across all of our campuses globally. So it could very well be that one of our campuses may have to be remote for the fall, while another one, if it's in a location that is safe and the government has fully endorsed opening, we could be open. So what that might mean is that it might mean that we have, like all other universities, we have just remote classes. We're hoping to be fully open in the fall. It could also mean that we relocate certain students who are supposed to be on one campus and they weren't able to, so we give them the option of being remote. Or if they want to spend a semester at a different location overseas, that could be an option. So there's really a lot of opportunities there. But overall, in terms of our current status, we are planning to be open for usual business in the fall. But of course, that really changes day to day. So we don't have a timeline yet when that final decision will be made.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there are all sorts of possibilities here, right? I mean, we can look at a few options, but the permutation and combinations are so wide. I mean, what happens if, campus is open, but immigration is not? What happens if immigration is on, but like the student that the country that the student is coming from don't allow their citizens to go abroad. So I don't think there are any easy answers here, and probably all of us are going to have to be patient and just wait and watch how this unfolds. So thank you so much. That is a solid unanimous response to the first, and I think the largest question on people's mind. As I look at the poll responses, the number 2 point is, rethinking study abroad. And this is so understandable, right? For an international family who's sending their children away to the United States or any other country abroad. Safety, security, emotional challenges, and perhaps also the financial reality of so many families has changed with the currency fluctuations and the change in the value of their investments. For example, I mean the Bombay Stock Exchange Sensex index has dramatically fallen, and here in India, the US dollar to INR ratio has shot up by at least 10%. So surely that's going to have some impact on families. Are you having similar conversations with the parents? Are parents reaching out to you about, maybe, extra financial aid or extra scholarships? Paul, what are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, happy to chat about that. I think that's very much a concern for families coming from overseas, equally to families based in the US, looking at how the different stock indices in the US have lost between 10, 20, 30% of their value. So they're conversations that we're having regularly. For students coming from overseas, Tulane has opened up in kind of emergency financial relief. So the ability to help students contribute to their room and board or tuition. We have not set for the fall semester whether or not we'll be online or in person, or what the tuition cost would be if we are online. I think we're anticipating that it would not be the same price in tuition as if students were fully in person on campus. So there are a lot of different resources that the university is trying to open up. Revisiting some students' merit scholarship. We do offer need-based aid to international students as well. So trying to work with students in kind of the immediate future on that, but also reassuring families that in the nature of need-based aid, as we move into the next year, a family's financial situation and financial aid is always reflective of the prior year. So kind of ensuring them that we will have the ability to look more closely at currency fluctuations, not just this year, but in the future 4 years that a student might be on campus, and what that could really look like. So a lot of different variables in that. I would also like to point out from a less specific institutional standpoint and more from a US national standpoint, that international students are able to apply, who are still in the US, are able to apply for a kind of special consideration to have employment not only on campus, but off campus as well. Usually international students are restricted to working 20 hours a week on campus during the academic term, but in some certain cases, the US system as a whole has been flexible enough to allow international students the ability to work off campus and contribute to their own education.
That's fantastic. So what I'm hearing from you is that Tulane probably is going to have a second price point for the tuition if we go to an online mode of learning.
That's definitely in current talks, yes.
Yeah.
Because there are many realities that the pandemic increases the cost for many of our institutions, certainly losing a lot of revenue streams, but also simple things like the cost of running a Zoom account for thousands and thousands of daily participants is a new and added cost for us. But at the same time, if we're not coming back to campus, there are some significantly reduced costs in terms of university facilities, I think all of our university endowments have taken a pretty serious hit from the change in the market as well. But I think all of our institutions are prepared to weather the storm and continue going on for multiple hundreds of more years. So kind of ensuring continuity, I think it is really important for all of us, and we're willing to make some changes in the short term to ensure that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Ruby, what about at Barnard? Are you facing similar conversations these days? And has Barnard also taken a similar stand to Tulane on a lower price point for online education?
Thank you so much. So much of what Paul has said all applies to Barnard as well. Barnard also provides need-based financial aid, and that we do meet full demonstrated need for all students, including international students. In terms of a lower tuition rate for this coming fall, I'm not part of those conversations, so I can't really speak to that. What I can tell you is that for students who are on financial aid, we've been able to help students in terms of thinking about things like their summer contribution. We have grants that are available for students to be able to have that waived. And so a lot of things have been taken into consideration. We've been able to provide refunds to some of our students who are on financial aid. And so all of those things are things that we're absolutely discussing and thinking about for the fall. For international students, like Paul said as well, we encourage them to talk to our International Student Services Office about internship opportunities, both on campus as well as off campus. We are also working very closely with Barnard alumni who are based in India, who are helping students to find internship opportunities should they still be in India in the fall, even for this summer as well. And so definitely thinking, how can we, these students are definitely at the forefront of our mind as we're thinking about policy. How can we make sure that we're not just thinking about domestic students, but really making sure that all of our students are benefiting from the Barnard community, whatever that might look like this coming fall.
Thank you for that, Ruby. So I can imagine that, there's so much roll around going on right now in admissions because, people who have done their EDs and people, who are putting their deposits down. And I am certainly having these conversations with students and families, they're thinking about the US, they're thinking about another country, they're thinking of maybe now suddenly a backup college here in India. And, I'm talking to school counselors who are absolutely frowning at it, but they are reporting that there are more double deposits, and what happens in a scenario where, we assume that those are the numbers coming in, but then there is a melt because of either we are going online and people are deferring, or, even though they put the deposit down, they're thinking of going to another country because of a changed financial situation or immigration situation. So, I think I'd love to hear some thoughts on how all of that is going to be handled and how the wait list is going to be handled and how flexible our college is going to be with ED students, for example. Brendan, would you like to take that? You're muted, Brendan. Sorry, you'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Sorry. So I think kind of just before I address these concerns, we should preface the conversation concerning, deposits and what's going to be happening over the summer and concerning waitlists, et cetera. Many of our Indian colleagues may be familiar with the National Association of College Admissions Counseling and strong arm tactics that were taken to kind of change some ethical standards by which we communicate with students over the summer concerning how we interact with students who have deposited post May 1. And first of all, just in terms of double depositing, I think it's obviously a completely natural reaction for students to do that, considering the situation right now. And so I think that's completely natural and in some cases an appropriate course of action to be taken by students. I think the situation surrounding COVID-19 causing students to have uncertainty, pursuing double deposits in conjunction with the changes to the ethical standards that NACAC has been forced to undergo is going to turn a kind of a chaotic summer even more chaotic, unfortunately, I think, in terms of enrollment professionals' point of view. It's going to be a really, really fluid summer, I think, for most institutions. I think some institutions that were maybe hesitant to communicate with students post May 1 concerning, the potentiality of talking to students that may have deposited at other institutions, there may be in some tenuous situations concerning their fall numbers and may be forced to communicate. And so I think students should expect, increased communication from universities over the summer as we look to attempt to grasp onto a really fluid and slippery situation in terms of what's going to be happening with the summer and post May 1. I think it's really difficult to say right now how each institution will react. I think, we're not going to know the true ramifications of all of these different competing factors until, census in the fall, when we actually see how many students are on our campuses relative to deposited number, to the students who have deposited, et cetera. So I think, that's where we're at. I mean, I think it's difficult for institutions to kind of grasp onto this really fluid situation and the competing, complicating factors with these ethical standards that have changed in conjunction with double deposits, as students would naturally do relative to the COVID situation. And obviously the waitlist is going to be, I think, a big part of some university strategies in dealing with those uncertainties.
Yeah, it's definitely complex. No simple answers there, right? Yeah. Nicole, any responses to that?
I think for me, I was in a webinar this last week, and I'm sure a few of you have been in this situation where it's an admitted student and parents. And when you open up the questions and you say, what other questions do you have? There's at least one family who wants you to run through every possible scenario that could possibly ever happen and how it would unfold on campus. And I think, the hard part is, and that we don't know. So, schools could go out right now and say, yeah, we're going to be on campus for sure in the fall. But the reality is that no one globally can say that right now. Nobody. There's no country that you can deposit to or run to and assume that they know what's going to happen in months' time. There's nowhere. So, and you can't say even in India what's going to happen. As a backup option, are Indian universities ready to be online now? So I think no one has any idea. And so what I'm trying to convey to families is that this pandemic is hopefully a year. Your university is 4 years. So where do you want your 4-year experience to be? Where's the right place for you for 4 years? And if at all possible, sort of pull back from the minutia of the moment and try and look at the bigger picture, which is really hard right now, right? And then when you make that decision for 4 years, think about then how are we engage and know that school is going to do their best for you, to take care of you, to ensure that the delivery of their curriculum. All of our schools are in a position to deliver our curriculum from the US in a way that we will do our best at, right? And so I'm trying to convey that, understanding students are making deposits all over the place, trying to secure, but we're a team in the US to some degree, right? And that though we're different, we're all looking to each other as colleagues to say, how do we navigate the situation to best care for our students? So I think sometimes students think about us as competing forces, and the reality is a lot of us travel together and we're friends and colleagues. And so when we make these decisions, we call upon each other to say, how best do we care for our students? And how do we as a Team USA, move forward as a community to make sure we're making good decisions, sound decisions to support students? So I think the deposit, that panic is like, you never make a good decision in the moment of panic. How do you back away from panic and come back to like a longer, and I think teenagers maybe not so great at looking at the long run and maybe a little more impulsive. I'm guessing that they're a bit more impulsive in their decision making and a little bit more, reactionary. So how do we, and how do we bring parents, reach out to parents to bring them back to a place that they're comfortable with and can feel safe with their students in thinking in the long term. In terms of waitlist, I think everything is fluid right now. Everyone's kind of responding in different ways. Some people are admitting everyone from the waitlist and hoping that it works out in the fall and they don't end up with too many kids on campus. Some of us are, just in constant rolling mode of like, okay, how do we deal with the current situation today and how do we support students? There's no way to tell like what's happening with deposits. There's no way to tell the double deposit. The only scenario that makes sense is, I heard one counselor say last week, 1 deposit per country, right? Because it impacts who comes off our wait list to some degree. If you think you've got a lot of kids already, enrolled, then maybe you're not going to the wait list, and that can impact in a particular country. But I don't think there's any right answer. Just like for us, we'd love to have all the right answers, but I think that's every institution's responding differently with their wait list. Some schools are going to I've heard one school say, well, we're just going to assume no internationals are going to come in the fall. We're just going to go off that grid. And I think that's a huge leap for some schools. I hope and we'll feel that that's not the case, but I think every school is just kind of moving forward in a different way.
Yeah, thanks for that. But it's as you were talking, I was just picturing the student who I'm supposed to speak with tomorrow. She's put her deposit down at one school because it was a May 1 school, and then her second school, which is a June 1, and she's thinking, well, I still have time on that one. Maybe, and then she's waitlisted at Cornell, and what's she supposed to do? John, this is probably the first time and such an interesting time for you to be in your role. What are you expecting with the waitlist and the deferred?
Well, I think the one thing we can probably expect with waitlist is that if you're waitlisted at a place where you'd prefer to go, it remains your first choice, or it becomes your first choice through the course of what you've been studying, you might find that you're on that list longer, meaning there's not as much security about releasing people from the wait list based on hitting a certain threshold and feeling there's no point in the way that Brendan and Cole have both described to feel like, okay, this is a secure set number. To the extent that you got international students, that's one dimension, and to the extent that some people might respond that they do not want to pursue an online experience, even if this is their first choice university, they're just not choosing to do that for this fall. So I think I can speak for my colleagues at institutions like Cornell, because I've had these conversations with them. We're just expecting it to take longer. Maybe not so much because of the June 1st deadline, and not so much because of the double depositing or the other countries, but just not being able to feel sure, okay, we've got the number we expect and we need. We've collectively recognized that pushing waitlist past July 1 has always been troublesome. It's no less troublesome now, to the extent that we start to know whether we're online or not. So I think students can count on it that we're putting their interests at heart and not holding on to them just for the sake of a tease, but trying to recognize the reality. I can describe the situation at Cornell, and I don't think it's very different other places. If I'm looking at what's optimal for student health in the circumstance that they are on campus, it may be that allowing for social distancing and quarantining in our dorm capacity is pretty important. I would argue for a somewhat smaller final freshman class than we were originally planning for. On the other hand, if we're expecting a whole lot of students to change their mind come June or so, when we make a decision about online or not, you would hold on to a bigger number of classes. So there's a pretty big, and I'm an enrollment manager, I have to think this way, there's about a 15% swing in the number of students that you would expect to have, which means we will not be releasing students from the wait list as fast as we normally might have. So that uncertainty will prevail. And I think the rules then are the same, and we're upfront about this at Cornell. As we look at students on the wait list, we will be considering those students that have shown that they are continuing to be interested in Cornell as their best choice. So we'll create more opportunities for them to engage with us, and we will look at that engagement as an indication that this is the place where they'd really like to be, and we'll do what we can to look to provide them that opportunity. So I think if you're on a wait list somewhere that you really, really love, show the love, not obsessively, not every day, nothing like that. You don't need to send us presents, but if there's things you're concerned about and you care about and you want to engage with us around those questions, I think this is an appropriate activity to undertake during May and June until things are fully set.
Can I add something to that? I think a piece that high school counselors overseas might not immediately think of as a real restriction for us, but is the ability of our own current students, our third-year students, to be able to go on their study abroad programs, right? I think for a lot of us, we have somewhere between 20 and 70% of our junior year students usually going abroad, which opens up space not only in housing, but also in the academic setting to keep our average class size at a certain rate. And we don't yet know if our students are going to be able to go to the UK and Italy and Singapore and Australia and all these other places. And so that's a real limiting factor. We might need to keep our class smaller than usual because we could have an extra 700 students or 2,000 students on campus who aren't doing their usual junior year abroad. So that's another limiting factor.
Yeah, it only gets complicated, right? So, there was a certain video that was circulated here in India a few days ago that there's going to be more kids deferring from this year. And because there are a limited number of beds next year, it's going to have a massive impact on the number of kids that are going to be, colleges are going to accept next year, So anybody have any sense on that? I know it's a shot in the dark, but any comments on that?
I will say that so far at NYU, we haven't seen a whole lot of activity in terms of deferrals relative to the past few years. The numbers are very similar. That doesn't mean necessarily by any stretch that we won't see an enormous uptick. Of course, we haven't made any formal announcements for the fall yet. We're not sure. But so far, it seems like anecdotally and somewhat by the numbers, however reliable they are given the circumstances, that students still seem like they're at a similar rate planning to attend. So I don't know if that signifies a larger pattern. I think that there are a lot of students that we talk to that say, okay, I really don't want to be remote for the fall, but it's unlikely that it'll carry over more than just the fall if that does happen. So they are in some senses able to see the larger picture. So, we are really hoping for that. But at the same time, there is a lot of discussion about, okay, so should universities in the US and globally and wherever go down the road of needing to be remote for the fall, and we do see an enormous uptick in deferral requests, what will that mean for the following admission cycle? So there are major implications for that, and there are a lot of discussions, but unfortunately just not a whole lot of answers quite yet for that.
I'd also say too, if you have students who are not going abroad this year, and you have a bunch of deferrals, maybe that creates a perfect storm, right? Like where all of a sudden a bunch of our kids are catching up on their study abroad and we're receiving, and I mean, hopefully, right, in the world of how exchanges happen, maybe that exchange changes out at an equal rate. Can we get some sort of formula on that, John?
I mean, are you anticipating lower numbers from China, lower numbers domestically? What's it going to be like?
Who knows?
I think, right, who knows? But just from initial kind of glarings at data, it does appear that a lot of international students are potentially depositing at a higher rate overseas because maybe they want to get out of the current situation they're in. I'm certainly not saying that we're doing it the right way in the US, but if you look at international media or social media, people in the US are kayaking and running through parks. And I mean, it's that luster of freedom. Now, maybe we're not doing it the right way to fully protect everyone, but if you have a comparable situation where you're not allowed to leave your society or apartment building, I think all of a sudden it becomes a pretty appealing situation. So we've seen international deposits at a higher rate, just unsure what will happen in the end.
I would just encourage people, there isn't really, as far as I can tell, a need to be too strategic or to try to play this as inside baseball. Using inside cricket. The students should pursue the community and the school that they want to attend. It's very likely that that school will have to be actively considering online only options for the fall semester, but as I think Nicole or maybe Ruby said, maybe things become more normalized again in spring as treatments are available, or we understand more about the virus, or even at that point starting to get close to opportunities with vaccines. So a fall semester that is, at home online is terrible and it sucks and it shouldn't happen to you. And everybody is very apologetic about this circumstance for the graduating class of 2020. But then you've got 7 semesters of activity. And I think, I mean, all the things that Paul has raised are accurate. Study abroad is completely in flux, but that's likely to have ramifications both ways. International students not being able to come to the US students not being able to go abroad. There's no way to pin down exactly where those numbers will take you, but there's going to be very likely some flows in both directions on that. And it doesn't necessarily, to me, make sense that we would over-calculate those. One thing I had explored was whether we could have more students start in a January term, meaning defer completely the fall, just not attend. There's no appetite for that. If the calendar gets delayed, that's one thing. If we go online one semester and in person the next, that's okay. But the faculty, there's just too many courses in sequence that are designed to be a continuous fall, spring throughput in fundamental fields like chemistry and mathematics. And so it doesn't seem likely that we'll have a big bunch of people starting their first semester in January, or that phenomenon will grow tremendously because of this.
Yeah, if I could just say, I know we were going to be talking a little bit more about deferral of admissions later in the conversation, because this kind of seems where we're at right now, but just, I totally, to reiterate what John said, I would absolutely encourage students to choose the best option that's available to them, optimistically considering that they will be on campus in the fall. And, to reiterate what Alex said, I mean, we really haven't seen a huge uptick in the requests for deferrals of admissions, whether that be for the spring semester or the following fall semester. Who knows what's going to happen over the summer as things change? Maybe that will gain momentum, and we're making contingency plans for students to be arriving on campus in the spring and potentially next fall. But certainly encouraging students to pursue the best option that's available to them at this time, I think, would be some solid advice, as we're all optimistically hoping, whether online or in person, that the fall semester will be a little bit different, but we will make the most of it.
Thank you, Brendan. Okay, I think, last question, and this is for Ruby, is, any interesting advice that you have for our counselor audience, or anything that, you can recommend that students do between now and fall in order to get ready for college better, any differently from what we've been saying in the past?
Sure. I would say this summer especially, taking a lot of deep breaths, I think, will be an important part of this summer, recognizing that there are a lot of things going on here that are completely out of your hands. And so taking those deep breaths and acknowledging that you've done nothing to create this situation. We've done nothing to create this situation. And so recognizing in this moment, just taking those deep breaths. One of the biggest pieces of advice I think we are all hearing from scientists and medical professionals is that the virus decides the timeline. We don't have answers because the virus decides. And so at this time, as much as we would love to give you clear answers of things will happen on X date and we will know exactly what's happening, we can't. No one can. And so taking those deep breaths, I think John alluded to this earlier. If you have been admitted to our institutions and chosen to enroll, you are going to be a student at our university. And so keeping that in mind, I think students and families have this fear that we will say, actually, never mind, you're not a part of our community. No, you are very much a part of our community, and that means prioritizing your health and safety. And so in this process, very much recognizing that we are here to support you. If you have been admitted to Barnard and chosen to enroll, we are here to support you. You will definitely be a Barnard student. That just may look different in this fall. But you are very much a part of our community. You are getting all of the benefits that come with being a Barnard student, being a part of the Columbia community. It just might look a little bit different, but we are still here to support you. So do keep that in mind. I hope that puts families at ease a little bit. But as much as I would like to give you definitive answers, I wish I could.
Well, thank you for that. Let's shift gears and conduct our second poll. Our second poll is, for students who are applying this fall, and this is for the audience here, for the counselors in the audience. It's what worries you the most for the students who are applying this fall. I'm launching it now, and let's give it a minute or so. Okay, 10 more seconds. Great, thank you. Pencils down. And those are the results. Let me put them up on the screen. Clearly, everybody wants us to talk about reading applications without test scores, potentially without test scores, and with an altered reporting of what the high school curve looks like compared to previous years. So perhaps I can get Travis to maybe speak about this. You know, what's it going to be like? How are the UCs going to read applications without the SATs?
Yeah, I mean, the UC system was actually one of the first systems to suspend the the SAT ACT requirement. So from the beginning, we've tried to be very compassionate with the complications their students are going through right now. In terms of reading applications and how that will impact students applying for the fall of 2021, it's going to be a neutral factor. Students who do sit for the exam can elect to submit their scores or not. Again, it's not really going to be a significant factor. I'd also like to add that for UCLA in general, standardized exams have always been the least significant part of the application. We prioritize academics, external exams, extracurricular involvement, leadership, more so than the SAT or ACT performance. So that's essentially the only answers we have right now. We're still, again, in the process of kind of determining how we want to proceed going forward.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, you had, I think, some amount of experience now reading applications without test scores. You know, perhaps you could share some of your experience with us about how you think things are going to be different in the future.
Sure. I mean, for Union, a lot of it remains the same. So students sometimes felt more confident with an SAT score to lead their way if maybe their curriculum did not exhibit necessarily as well their ability. And the Indian board system can be particularly tricky, like some that they offer benchmarks, not necessarily at times where we need them in the US. You know, so grade 10, we have a good assessment. And then after that, it's sort of like a dart on a dartboard to kind of sort out. So some students have used, in schools have used the SAT as a benchmark. And what I would say is for us, and this is a conversation I've often had both with students and with our administration, is that it remains that SATs still do not give us a good assessment of who is going to be successful on our campus. And so for us, things like the interview, you know, I always tell students, don't be scared of an interview. 99% of the time, maybe 99.9, it either helps or has no impact. Very rarely does it have a negative impact, I would say, but it does give us a really great sense of students and what they're interested in. For students coming from places that are not native English speakers, it gives us a good assessment of comprehension and participation. And that's in lieu of oftentimes a language assessment to just build that level of comprehension. There are other things, you know, some interview services allow students to do an impromptu writing, which also allows us to get an assessment of their writing ability. And there are other measures that we can do pretty easily for reading. So in terms of language capacity, there's a lot that's there, but even just in terms of academic interest, interest in their field, engagement in what they're doing, demonstrating their love of the things that they've done extracurricularly, so much of that can come out in an interview and in the way that a student engages with you or an alum or a professor. It allows a student really to demonstrate their capabilities. And I'd say there are other things too, of course, just ability with curriculum to display how a student is doing. If a student's in an international curriculum, there are more checks or ability to see their progress through transcript. If a student is in a place where a teacher recommendation or recommendations can be provided, then those are incredibly helpful, as well as counselor recommendations. And beyond that, for students who are working with independent counselors that we know well, those independent counselors really can build up a long history of demonstration of what students are doing as well. So for us at Union, it's always been a much bigger picture of what's all included in the application. And I would say that oftentimes things like the interview and academic pieces have far more weight than an SAT for us in terms of fit for campus, success in college, in terms of how we can trace out their success and their performance in college. All of those things play out at a much higher rate.
Thanks, Nicole. I mean, I don't expect Cornell is going to be interviewing every single candidate that applies to them. So, John, how are you going to tackle this curveball?
No, we won't be interviewing at all. But we did, when we announced that we would allow students to apply without the SATs and the ACTs last week, and that's on our admissions news website, we actually explicitly outlined all the other things, most of which Nicole mentioned, that we would be looking at in greater depth with students, the quality of their writing, the transcript and the evidence that's from their other exams, if that exists, like in India they often do with 10th grade. So we're going to use everything that we can find. We don't interview. That's not really an evaluative interview, has not been part of Cornell's process for a long time. For those students who are applying for something where there is something relevant they can show for their major, I'm thinking about portfolios and where writing matters a lot in the writing curricula, that will be the heaviest emphasis. For those going into sciences, it'll likely be evidence of what's the strongest math course they've taken. So that applies, for instance, in IB. Are you doing a higher level math in one of the directions that matters the most if you're headed towards a curriculum that requires math? So those kinds of choices. One thing I did put in the statement that seems to be growing in its importance is evidence of students pursuing whatever other educational opportunity they can. That seems to apply even more in the nature of this pandemic, meaning finding that thing to do. For those who are lucky enough to have the online ability to access the online courses, the open courses and enrollment that's there, evidence that they can derive from that activity is going to show their continuing curiosity, their sort of eagerness to learn. It becomes a way to do that more important than it used to be. If people are able to set up creative online activities that they run in some way, fine. I think that space is going to be competitive. It's going to be sort of hard to differentiate yourself. But also, there's needs in your community. This is certainly true throughout India. Volunteering in your community when you can't get an internship with a famous physician in their office, but volunteering to help other people, I think would show that curiosity and that interest in being engaged in the community and contributing. And there's so much you can learn from those kinds of experiences. I think there'll be more weight on that than there would have been in the past.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm just thinking of, all the difficult decisions you're going to have to make. Test optional does not mean test blind. So certainly, two kids going to go head to head. One of them has taken the SAT, let's say an early part of grade 11 and the other who hasn't. How would you, dissect that and make that decision?
May I take?
Yeah, sure, Ruby, go ahead.
So this is a question many of the counselors who are in the audience who I've known for a decade now know that this is a question that I love to answer because it's an unrealistic situation. This idea that two students come down head to head, that has never happened. That doesn't happen within the context of our classes. And then so first know that situation doesn't happen. And in all these years of doing this, I've never seen in highly selective admissions, it just come down to the last day, two students. That's never happened. I mention all of this because, I think a lot of, we've also gone test optional at Barnard for the next year. And I think there's an assumption that, when we talk about holistic admissions and, standardized testing historically has been a part of that it's a formula and that there is a formula that we adhere to and therefore testing is a significant part of that. And now we're eliminating that part and therefore that's disrupted the formula. But when we speak to holistic admissions, we talk about how all of the pieces are important. And that's going to continue to be true. I can assure you that in all of these years prior to any of this happening, we were not admitting your students because of their test scores. That was never the singular fact that, oh, wow, look at those test scores. That's the only reason I am interested and compelled by the student's application, which you've seen as evidence because there have been students who've had phenomenally high test scores who have not received admission to our institutions. And so I think there's a perception that there is such a drastic shift away from our traditional way of reading because of without the test scores. But in reality, holistic admissions, as my colleagues have already said, the testing was a part of it, and oftentimes a very small part of it. And so it really actually isn't too much of a deviation from the work that we're already doing in terms of thinking about your applicants holistically speaking. So we were never just admitting them just because they did great on a test.
Okay, thank you. You have anything else to add to that, John, or should we proceed ahead? No, good to go, because as I'm aware very much that it's 7:30 p.m. here in India, and we are coming to a close. I know we had more questions to discuss, other factors to talk about, but I think we've taken up a lot of your time as well as the audience time. So I think I want to thank everybody for taking time out today to be on the panel. Thank you so much. And maybe quickly, I will just run through some of the questions that have been posted by the audience. Okay, so this is something we were going to talk about, but didn't get a chance to. So the question is, since the visa situation is uncertain, would you be more likely to only take domestic students off the wait list? So anybody, feel free. Open house.
I can jump in. I was going to be talking about kind of the visa situation and job opportunities relative to the process here at in the United States. And I can say, at least in Syracuse, no, that is not part of our thinking. We are not going to be, obviously, there's going to be some significant challenges going forward. If your embassy is closed, you can't apply for a visa. That's going to obviously provide some significant challenges in terms of arriving to the United States. But we are assuming that those students will get here eventually, and that's not going to be, pitting domestic versus international yield against each other in terms of making decisions regarding the wait list is not something that we're thinking about. And just while I had something I just wanted to mention relative to visas, and I think this is really important to mention, considering the political rhetoric that is going on in the United States surrounding immigration. And this is something that I really try to reiterate with a lot of the students from around the world that I'm talking to relative to coming to the United States and trying to find opportunities here, whether, it's just for university or with potential opportunities post-university and employment. India, the United States, just like nations across the world, and I strongly ask counselors to communicate this to their students, the political rhetoric that takes place at the highest levels of governments is not necessarily what is reflected, not only in terms of the processes surrounding visas, and also most certainly not in the feeling that folks on the ground have relative to immigration. And so, I think there's a lot of perceived effects that aren't necessarily found in reality when you have a president like ours who likes to talk frequently about immigration, for better or worse. So I think it's really important that students and counselors really take everything that comes out of the White House with a strong critical eye and really utilize resources like ourselves, international services offices, to really understand the situation that's actually happening in the United States relative to F1 visas, relative to OPT, relative to the H-1B process. I mean, reality, there have been no significant changes to any of those visa processes since the Trump administration has come into effect. Most of you consider the latest declaration that Trump made concerning, banning immigration. Well, that's really just that's just really concerning folks that are applying for green cards from outside the United States. It's not affecting H-1B application process. It's not affecting F1 visa process. It's not affecting OPT. So I think it's really important that students understand that while there is this heightened rhetoric with the Trump administration concerning immigration, at least as it revolves in our world relative to higher education and the opportunities after higher education, there really hasn't been too many significant changes. And so I really think it's important for counselors to communicate that to students and utilize the resources that you have to kind of understand what is happening on the ground in reality. I mean, certainly it's a fluid situation and things change, and things I'm sure are going to be getting more complicated relative to the COVID-19 situation and immigration. But right now, relative to higher education, there hasn't been significant changes surrounding F1, OPT, or the H-1B process. So I just wanted to make sure that folks understand that.
Yeah. Thank you, Brendan. Anybody else want to jump in or add anything else? Oh, okay. Well, there's a couple of interesting questions here. You know, one is asking me, what if the visa gets rejected after the online semester of fall? Will you refund the fees? You know, it's an interesting question. So what happens later, you know, if we enroll a student and they do a fall semester online and they don't get a visa later?
If I could just follow up one more time, just relative to the visa situation. I mean, in essence, right now, the question is, and things could change, but the question is moot to a certain extent, because currently students can maintain their F1 student visa status and study from home online. That is something that DHS has recently announced. So, I mean, right now, students would not necessarily be kicked off of their F1 visa because they're studying on home online. I mean, if that were to happen, which I mean, it would be, the ramifications would be tremendous across higher education. But I would assume that if students had to go home because of a visa situation, just like now, regardless of visa maintenance and potential illegalities that happen that cause a student to lose their status, I'm sure they would be eligible for some type of tuition refund.
No, I mean, one thing.
Does that make sense for folks?
Yeah. Nicole, go ahead.
I think to the point, if you have new incoming students beginning in the fall and their first term is online in the fall. So sort of to Brendan's point, typically all of us have had very little to no issues with F1 achieving, students getting their F1 visa. At Union, none. So that's not going to change. And then if a student has already been pursuing a fall online with us, and then they have a transcript, I'd assume that the likelihood of them getting that and demonstrating that they can be successful out of college, it only goes up in terms of ability. So I think, you know, again, I think that for us already, we are looking at the visa denial rate very low. Again, never at Union, but I think it's typically just something you can point directly to. And then if a student's already been taking courses on our campus, that already shows that they can be successful on our campus. They're legitimate students on our campus, and that's sustainable. The only thing that might be different is making sure that a financial capability to pay from a family is demonstrated and matches what's on the I-20. And that is in line with a university responsibility to verify, as well as a family's to be in a position to demonstrate that. But that's kind of a partnership in making sure that exists when a student goes into that visa interview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John.
Just the one thing that might occur is that you might recall that there was China, then Italy, then Spain, and they sort of went through these identifications as stage 2, stage 3 kinds of countries. If you imagine us coming out of that pandemic the same way, which is certainly imaginable, it could be the case that there's a country-specific issue. So overall, we're in person in some kind of distributed way, some kind of careful way, and therefore not mounting the same online effort, and it's just in your country. I think I would second what Brendan had said, where in that case, a deferral or a rebate, a refund of some kind would certainly be the case. So there may be an occasion and a need for families to pursue this one-to-one with the colleges as they go. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's more of a universal relaxation and a universal response, but it strikes me that that's possible. It's worth noting it's possible.
Yeah, sure. So many possibilities, right? I mean, another one came to my mind right now is, you know, you get in, the semester is happening online in fall, but the embassy is shut. You know, I mean, when do you even apply? So there are so many possibilities here. It's unimaginable. So, but I think I've taken a lot of time of everybody, and I will make a note of all the questions that I'm seeing here and try to collect some responses and share that with the audience. So on that note, I want to thank everybody for attending today's session. It's 7:40 p.m. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to the panel who has contributed their valuable time and insights. I really appreciated it. We did a poll with our students who were at college on how they thought their colleges responded to COVID-19 on a scale of 0 to 10. And I'm happy to report that all of your colleges were 8 and above. So thank you so much for everything that you have done for the students, as they migrated out of the campus and come back to India. Very much appreciate all your help. Thank you so much, and I look forward to being in touch. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.